I'm going to get into the material pretty quickly here, but before I do, I want to say something to you first. Everyone has a first day. Every journeyman you'll ever meet, every trainer, every expert in the field, they all had a moment where their eyes went a little bit wider and they said, what have I got myself into here? I remember mine. My first job in the trades was for a big company in Calgary, Alberta, and pretty much everything on that first day had me feeling like I was completely in over my head. Don't worry, that's normal. That's why this lesson is all about the beginning, what the trade is actually about, what you're stepping into, and what really matters in these early days and stages. So we'll take it piece by piece, one step at a time, just like it works in real life. So let's get started. Welcome to the first video in our series. A quick message to all the instructors and trainers out there. This is for anyone who wants to listen, but especially if you're planning on using my content for any students, or even if you're a trainer at a company using it for your employees. My teaching style is something I call Socratic engagement. If you want to learn more about it, I've got other videos you can check out, but I'm mentioning it right now because as you go through this lesson, you'll find that I have sections where I ask questions. Every time I come to a section like this, you'll see this logo in the bottom right corner of the screen. I'm going to pause when I ask those questions, which will allow you to pause the video and ask yourselves or your students those same questions. And it's this kind of engaged discussion that helps to form and shape the way I deliver my content. So feel free to do that if you'd like. This lesson is called Introduction to the Trade. We're starting exactly where you would on day one, year one, whether you're entering a pre-apprenticeship program, beginning your first year of training, or if you're enrolled in a 1 or 2 year refrigeration and HVAC program. We're going to cover a lot in a short amount of time, and so you'll see chapter breaks throughout the video so you can move ahead or return to any section easily. I'll begin by introducing myself and explaining why I believe I have something of value to offer you as you start your journey in this trade. And if you'd like to share who you are and what you're studying and why you've chosen this field, I'd genuinely like to hear from you. My name is Ryan Burton, and I'm a Red Seal certified refrigeration and air conditioning mechanic. I completed my training in British Columbia, and I also hold 313A certification in Ontario. I'm a Class A gas fitter in BC and a G1 gas technician in Ontario. If you're not familiar with what those certifications mean or why they matter, don't worry, we'll cover all of that as we move through this course, both provincially and from a Canadian perspective. Over the years, I've completed a wide range of additional training, heat load analysis, mechanical ventilation design, and many other specialized courses. One of the things I love about this trade is that the learning never stops. If you enjoy picking up new skills and applying them directly on the job, you're going to thrive here. I've been working in HVAC and refrigeration for more than 23 years. I've spent over 8 years as one of the owners and lead trainers of an HVAC company, and throughout my career, I've hired, trained, taught, and mentored a lot of apprentices and experienced workers. Outside of ammonia refrigeration, I've worked in almost every major area of our trade. I'm not an expert in all of them, far from it, but what I do know extremely well are the fundamentals, and those fundamentals apply no matter which direction you take your career. This is our map, so you can see exactly where we are in the journey. We'll start every lesson with this map so you can follow along, see what you might want to go back to if you've missed something, how much we've covered, and what's coming up next if you want to get ahead before the next lesson. If you'd like to pause here and even take a screenshot, I'll give you a couple seconds to do that. Okay, you'll see that our first chapter is called What the Trade is All About. Before I tell you anything, I want you to think about something for yourself. If someone asked you, or the people you know, refrigeration mechanics, what do they do? What would the answer be? Most people know what an automotive mechanic is. They know what a welder does, or a carpenter, or any number of other trades. For a long time, our trade was simply called refrigeration mechanic. Now, in BC and Ontario, it's formally referred to as refrigeration and air conditioning mechanic. This gives a bit more insight, but even then, most people still have no real idea what we're trained in, what we're knowledgeable about, or the kind of equipment we work on. People in other trades might have some exposure, but the general public often assumes we're appliance repair technicians, and that's usually as far as their understanding goes. I've said for years that a more accurate name for our trade would be thermal management technicians, or TMTs, because at the core of everything we do is one fundamental concept: moving heat from one place to another. Yes, when we get into HVAC specifically, we deal with things like indoor air quality and air movement, humidity, and comfort. But the foundational principle, the thing that ties our entire trade and everyone who works within it together, is heat transfer. We move heat, we control heat, we manage heat, and we do it using a wide range of systems, technologies, and methods. Now think about this. Why do you think people so often misunderstand what we do? And how would you explain our trade to someone who's never heard of it? If you're like most people, the first thing you think about when you hear the word refrigeration is product refrigeration. This is the equipment that keeps our food and beverages cold or frozen. The machines in grocery stores, restaurants, and even our own homes. But the reality of this trade is that the core skills you develop here apply across a wide range of systems and situations in the world around us. In the last 20 years, the advances in the kind of HVAC equipment we see on commercial rooftops have been nothing short of revolutionary. Traditional rooftop units, or RTUs, and large-scale HVAC systems have increasingly shifted towards more efficient variable refrigerant flow, or VRF technology. And that's just one example. All right, so while VRF is getting more popular in North America, overwhelmingly the majority of equipment we still see on roofs are rooftop units, traditional systems with ductwork coming off of them, big mechanical equipment. VRF hasn't gained the same kind of popularity and frequency that we've seen with installations over in places like Asia or Europe. Now, VRF, variable refrigerant flow, a lot of people in the industry use that term, in my opinion, a little inappropriately. They talk about any kind of a heat pump that has a variable speed compressor as being variable refrigerant flow. Okay, well, that's true to a degree, but equipment like we saw in that last slide, where the roof has these crazy fields of big units, what we're talking about there is essentially heat recovery systems. So this is technology and equipment that allows big commercial buildings to be simultaneously in heating and cooling at the same time. Why would we want that? If you imagine a big commercial building where you have an area of the building that has a bit of an excess of heat, and you have another area of the building where you have a requirement for heat, simultaneous heating and cooling with this technology means you can literally move heat from one area of the building to another area of the building, giving us phenomenally efficient equipment. So just one of the things we didn't really see at all 20 and 30 years ago that we're now starting to see with greater regularity. And it's just a sign of the evolution of the trade and the evolution of what we need to know as professionals within it. Outside of grocery stores and basic heating or cooling, what do you think refrigeration and air conditioning mechanics could work on? How about the systems behind the products you find in grocery stores long before they ever reach the shelves? One area of experience for me personally is the dairy industry. In BC, I had the opportunity to work for a company that's been serving the dairy sector since 1969. In some operations, the milk is cooled as it leaves the milking parlor and enters a storage tank that's already chilled. But in most cases, the tank itself has a dedicated refrigeration system that rapidly cools the milk to safe temperatures, fast enough to prevent bacterial growth, and stable enough to keep it cold until the milk truck arrives. And I can tell you from experience, as far as service calls go, you've never had a more panicked customer than a farmer calling at 3 a.m. saying, the milk truck's an hour away and we're not at temperature yet. Now, most ticketed refrigeration and air conditioning mechanics who look at this image may groan loud enough for you to feel it. Yes, we're talking about residential, but one of the things that gets me most excited about where our industry is heading is the increasing level of expertise people are bringing into the world of residential heating and cooling. Across Canada, most jurisdictions have exemptions that allow anyone, ticketed or not, to work on several types of residential systems. Even when restrictions are in place, we don't exactly have the AC police monitoring who works on equipment and who doesn't. But here's the truth. A huge percentage of the fundamentals you learn in school are absolutely required if you want to consider yourself a professional in the residential sector as well. And while it's true that you can learn anything completely on your own, a formal education through a recognized apprenticeship program in this trade is another level. When the technicians you're stacking your knowledge against don't have the same foundational training, you're going to feel like Michael Jordan playing basketball against a group of fifth graders. Now, a quick note to my manufacturers and distributors out there, and for everybody who's ever going to talk to one. When you call into tech support and you have the knowledge and the skills and the fundamentals that literally only come from a formal apprenticeship program, these tech support people at the distributors and at the manufacturers who sometimes speak to hundreds of people a day, they've got you pegged in 5 seconds if you know what you're talking about and you've been through a formal program, or if you're handy Randy or chucking a truck. And trust me, you're going to have a much different conversation on the phone with these pros, depending on whether or not you have that knowledge and training. Chapter 2 is called Beginning Your Journey. And in this section, we're going to talk about the formal apprenticeship system in Canada, what it looks like, how it works, and the broad stroke structure behind it. If you're interested in pursuing this as a career and you're not already registered as an apprentice, or even if you are and you still have questions about the process, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm always happy to help clarify anything. And this applies to business owners, trainers, and educators as well. If you want to understand the system and how it works in another province, or you just want to have a conversation about the process in general, I'm more than happy to talk. But before we get into how the apprenticeship system is structured, I want to ask you some questions. Why do you think apprenticeship matters in a trade like ours? What do you think would happen if there were no apprenticeships? What do you think that would mean for manufacturers? What about for distributors? What about for contractors? And what about for the end user or customer? Here in Canada, we have 10 provinces and 3 territories, and every one of them has its own apprenticeship system. Red Seal gives us an interprovincial standard, but each province still has its own way of doing things. Canada is a huge country. We have different climate zones, different histories of how work has been done, and different building styles and technologies that have evolved over time. So think about this. What would it look like if everything were the same everywhere? Or is it better when the big things, like safety and engineering, stay consistent, while the way we learn and train adapts to local culture and regional realities? Starting with BC. I want to give you a quick lay of the land for how apprenticeship works in British Columbia. In BC, refrigeration and air conditioning mechanic is a regulated trade. The organization that oversees everything, your schooling, your hours, your certification, is Skilled Trades BC. They're the ones who set the standards, approve the training, and ultimately with your sponsors sign off on your journeyman certification. For today, I want to leave you with 3 key things about how apprenticeship works in BC and how Skilled Trades BC fits into your journey. Your schooling only counts if it's accredited. That means Skilled Trades BC has officially approved your school and the program you're taking. They've checked the instructors, the equipment, the curriculum, everything. If it's accredited, your technical training hours count toward your level 1 to 4 progression. They even have a list of approved training providers right on the website, so it's easy to find where you can take your schooling. You must be registered as an apprentice through your employer. This is huge. Your employer is the one who sponsors you, and Skilled Trades BC is the organization that officially tracks your work-based hours, the hours you're learning on the job while getting paid. Those hours are what move you towards certification. No registration means no hours, and no hours means no progress. So this is one of the first things you want to make sure is set up properly. Now, yes, there are challenge pathways for experienced workers. Skilled Trades BC supports those routes too, and they do a great job making the process accessible and reasonable. But for most of you starting out, the standard pathway is employer sponsorship. Because refrigeration and air conditioning mechanic is a harmonized trade, your training is recognized across Canada. Harmonization means BC follows a national Red Seal structure. So if you ever move provinces, your training transfers cleanly. I'm a perfect example. When I needed to get certified in Ontario, my BC certification was recognized right away. I didn't need to rewrite exams or redo training. I just applied through the Ontario Authority and they issued the license. That's the power of a harmonized Red Seal trade. While the overall apprenticeship model is similar in Ontario, the system is organized a little differently than in BC. In Ontario, the trade is called Refrigeration and Air Conditioning Systems Mechanic, and it's regulated by Skilled Trades Ontario. They're the provincial authority responsible for certification, training standards, and apprenticeship oversight. Just like in BC, they manage your schooling, your hours, and final certification. But they do it under Ontario's own legislation, the Building Opportunities in the Skilled Trades Act from 2021. Here are the big takeaways for Ontario. Your schooling only counts if it's accredited. You must be registered as an apprentice through your employer. And because refrigeration and air conditioning mechanic is a harmonized trade, your training is recognized across Canada. Notice any similarities? BC and Ontario, two totally different systems, two different regulatory bodies, but the same three pillars hold the trade together. Approved training, employer-sponsored apprenticeship, and national Red Seal harmonization. That's not an accident. That's the Red Seal system doing exactly what it was designed to do: create a consistent, portable, high-standard trade across Canada. It's why I could take my BC certification and get licensed in Ontario without rewriting exams. It's why you can build a career anywhere in the country, and it's why the Canadian Red Seal designation is so respected around the world. So that's the big picture. The national system, the mobility, the standard, the reason this trade carries so much respect across Canada and beyond. But before we move on, I want to bring this right back to you, because all of that structure only matters once you step into the field. So let me ask you a few questions. When you picture your first day on the job, what's the feeling you imagine having? What do you think a company expects from a brand new apprentice on day one? And what do you expect from the company that hires you? What feels fair? What feels reasonable? And lastly, if you had to guess, what do you think separates a good first-month apprentice from a great one? Those answers right there, that's why Chapter 3 matters. Because your first 30 days are where everything becomes real. It's where the trade stops being theory and starts becoming your daily life. So let's talk about what that first month actually looks like, what you'll experience, what's expected of you, and how to set yourself up to be the kind of apprentice every company wants to keep. What those first 30 days look like will depend a lot on where you land. And education in refrigeration and air conditioning doesn't mean everyone ends up doing the same work. At the start of this course, we talked about some of the areas I've worked in, but this trade branches out in a ton of directions. Even if you are working as a technician, that can mean service, maintenance, installation, commissioning, controls, and that's across industrial, commercial, residential, institutional, and everywhere in between. And beyond field work, there are amazing opportunities with wholesalers, distributors, manufacturers, engineering firms, and large facilities or construction companies that rely on people with your skill set. Your training opens doors you might not even realize yet. And so with all that variety, the technical specifics of your first month can look very different depending on the company, the sector, and the role you step into. But here's the part that is consistent. There are certain experiences almost every new apprentice goes through in their first 30 days, and that's what we're going to focus on now. In this chapter, we're going to break down your first month into 3 big categories. What your onboarding, orientation, and initial training will probably look like, what reasonable expectations should be, both what you can expect from your employer and what they'll expect from you, and what you should focus on to become an exceptional apprentice, the habits and mindsets that will put you ahead of the pack from day one. If you understand these 3 areas, you'll walk into your first job with clarity, confidence, and a huge advantage over the average new apprentice. So what do we actually mean by onboarding, orientation, and initial training? They sound similar, but they're not the same thing. Each one plays a different role in your first days on the job. Let's break them down so you know exactly what these terms mean and what you can expect when you start. Onboarding is the full process of integrating you into the company. Everything from paperwork and safety protocols to meeting your team, understanding company culture, and learning how the organization operates. Orientation is definitely a part of onboarding, but onboarding is the big picture introduction that helps you feel grounded, prepared, and part of the team from day one. Orientation is the focused introduction to the specifics of the job you're stepping into. It covers the day-to-day realities, where things are, who you report to, how the shop or site operates, and the practical rules you need to follow to work safely and effectively. It's the part that turns a company from a name on paper into a place you actually know how to move throughout. If you've never worked in the trade before, your initial training phase can actually make up a huge portion of your first year on the job. This is where you're learning the tools, the systems and workflows, the safety habits, and the technical instincts that every good technician needs. It takes time, repetition, and exposure to real-world situations. If you already have experience, that initial training period can be much shorter. You'll move through it faster because you'll already have built some of the muscle memory and awareness that the trade demands. Okay, so an example of being somewhat of an experienced worker, but then having your training and orientation needing to start again, essentially. As for me, when I moved from HVAC into product refrigeration, it was around year 3 of my apprenticeship. The company I worked for was heavily involved in agricultural, and it was a lot of high stress type stuff. So there was some orientation and familiarization with stuff that was somewhat related to what my experience had already been, but it was also brand new. So this period of initial training, orientation, again, it's obviously going to apply if you're brand new, but definitely if you're changing gears a little bit and switching the area that you've come to get comfortable with, you're going to have a familiarization period that happens again. So it's not exclusively to new people, it happens to all of us. And this is exactly how apprenticeship is designed to work. As you move through each level and gain more experience, you'll be trusted to work more independently and with less supervision year after year. Whether your initial training lasts a few months or most of your first year, the real takeaway is this. If you show up every day with the mindset of someone who wants to learn, train, and grow, you will set yourself apart. That attitude will carry you through your first month, your first year, and honestly, your entire career. There's a lot that can be said, and honestly, a lot that needs to be said about reasonable expectations, especially for new workers. That applies to people who have never had a job before, but it also applies to experienced workers who are in their first few weeks with a new employer. You can go online and find endless commentary, opinions, and so-called expert takes about what is or isn't reasonable for employers to expect from employees, and vice versa. But the truth is, all of it is situational. Expectations shift depending on the region you're working in, the sector you're in, the company you're with, the type of job you're doing, and a dozen other factors. Here's the bottom line, and I'm speaking to you from personal experience on both sides of it, because I had to learn this the hard way. When people assume there's only one right way of doing something, that automatically makes every other way the wrong way. And when employers or employees make assumptions about expectations without ever talking about them, and again, this applies to both sides, the odds of getting it right and being aligned aren't just low, they're basically zero. Now, you'll hear people my age and older say things like, there are so many things that used to be obvious about having a job that young people just don't understand anymore. That stereotype, this new generation doesn't get it, is nothing new. People have been saying that about every generation that's ever come up. We can complain about it, or we can do something better. We can communicate. We can explain not just what reasonable expectations look like, but why they matter. The logic, the motivation, and the benefits on both sides. We can help people understand how clear expectations make the workplace safer, healthier, and more productive for everyone. So what's the takeaway? Communication, open lines of dialogue, and clarity instead of assumptions. If you're the employer, you need to create an environment where questions are welcomed and not punished. And if you're the employee, hear this clearly. Good employers, the ones worth your time, are not going to get upset because you ask too many questions. Even if you think the question sounds silly, even if you think you've asked it 13 times already. A reasonable expectation must be shared to be reasonable. If it stays in someone's head, it isn't an expectation, it's an assumption. Moving on to our last topic in Chapter 3, we could talk about it for a long time. How to be an exceptional apprentice. And yes, it's always contextual. It depends on the company, the crew, the job site, the industry, and what you're actually being measured against. For this lesson, we're going to focus on the basics, the things that matter everywhere, to every employer in every trade environment. One thing that still amazes me is how often employers and employees forget that the things that make someone exceptional are usually the exact same things that both sides care about. The overlap is huge, but people rarely talk about it. For me, in my first day, my first week, and even my first month at a new company, the question that always dominated my mind was the same. Am I actually showing the best version of myself to the people who need to see it? And I can tell you, as an employer, we want you to be able to do exactly that, especially in your first 30 days. That's when we're figuring out where you fit, who you should work with, and what kind of training environment will help you grow. Am I actually showing the best version of myself to the people who need to see it? Are you thinking this too? Does that sound like something you might be thinking about on your first day, your first week, your first month? If you want to stand out in 2026, if you want to be the apprentice people talk about in a good way, then there are habits and mindsets that will separate you from the pack. Show up 15 minutes early, not to start work early, but so you're ready when the clock starts. Take notes constantly. Tools you don't have, procedures you're learning, things you want to remember. Invest in yourself, even slowly. So one example that is sort of how I invested in myself, going back over 20 years ago when I was a first-year apprentice, I would have, this is before smartphones, so in our shirt pocket on our service shirt, we'd have a little notepad, a pen, tech screwdriver, and I'd be working with my trainer, my expert for the day, and I'd take a look at their tool bag. What do they've got this kind of a nut driver, or they've got these wire strippers or whatever, and I'd put a note in my notebook. I'd say, well, that's an interesting way of doing something. I'd like that tool one day, and I'd have a little notebook with all this stuff, and every 2 weeks, every paycheck, I would go out and I'd purchase sometimes just a nut driver, sometimes wire strippers. Sometimes it would be some sort of an electrical meter that I was saving up for a few weeks or something. Look, the point is this. I saw somewhere I wanted to be. I saw someone I wanted to be like, and I saw how they did things. And I simply said, I'm going to invest in myself to a degree that I'm comfortable and that I can incrementally over time. You don't have to do it all at once. You just have to be moving in the right direction. That's going to be different for everybody. And so you just have to figure out what that looks like for you. And so what do you think? Does buying tools make you exceptional? If there are two apprentices, one buys a ton of tools in week one, he goes all in. The other buys what they can afford, slowly, consistently. Does that alone make one exceptional and the other just satisfactory? No, not even close. It's not enough information. But what does matter? Who asks more questions throughout the day? Who shows up clean, prepared, and presentable? Who pays attention? Who cares? These are the signals that tell a company who you are long before your technical skills catch up. Standing out is intentional. Exceptional is intentional. The fact that you're still here watching this tells me you're not aiming for average. After 23 years in the trade, here's the truth. The real secret? Ask. Ask the people ahead of you. Your manager, your boss, your journeyman, your trainer. They'll tell you exactly where to put your energy. Then, watch what everyone else avoids and do that. These two habits alone will put you in the top 10%. Okay, so just a point of clarification on you need to do what everyone else is not doing. Obviously, I'm not referring to unsafe things. I'm not referring to, okay, people have been given instructions to do something and now you go to the opposite. I'm talking about the basic stuff. If you're working for a company where you show up and you're the only person who's there 15 minutes early and you're the only person who's looking presentable, your employers are going to notice that in a very, very fast way. Here's a stupid example of something I did. I'm not advocating that anyone should go and do this, but when I was an up and coming, probably fourth year journeyman at a company I worked at previously, there would always be a morning meeting. Guys would come in with their trucks and they'd have their little session in the morning before they went out getting their jobs distributed. Personally, I feel we spend so much time in our service vehicles. That's like your office to me. And I had one journeyman say to me one time, your windows are your eyes to the world. How can you drive with dirty windows? I hate being in the cab of a dirty service vehicle. Like my cab of my service vehicle looks like I'm about to trade it in on a new service vehicle almost all the time. I just find that makes for a more enjoyable day. And part of that is keeping the windows clean. I love nice, clean windows. So I would go and, well, guys were having their coffee. I would go and I would get Windex and some paper towel and I would clean everybody's windows. And I mean, I guess it's kind of stupid. I was a fourth year journeyman at that point. I didn't need to get noticed, but I appreciated it so much. I cared about the guys I was working with. It was just one little example. So do what everyone else is not doing. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. If your vacuum pump is the cleanest vacuum pump in the company because every time you change the oil in it, you give it a wipe down and a cleaning, or you're calibrating your manual analog gauges with digital gauges once a week, or your service van is the most clean, well-stocked service van and the cab is clean as well. We're talking about how to be exceptional. You don't need to do that to be employable or to be adequate or satisfactory. But if you want to level up and you're noticing that those are things that your colleagues and your coworkers are not doing, that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Chapter 4 is our introduction to safety. This might be the shortest safety lesson you'll ever get, and that's intentional because this chapter focuses on 2 points and 2 points only. As you move through your training, your education, and your career, you're going to receive a lot of safety instruction. Some of it will be broad and apply to everything you do. Some of it will be extremely specific to a single task, tool, or environment. But across all of it, there are 2 things you should never lose sight of. 2 things that in real practice have proven again and again to be among the most powerful ways to keep yourself, the people around you, and company assets safe. Those 2 things are exercising your right to refuse and learning to identify near misses. A huge amount of safety culture, policy, and training is built on these 2 foundations. And if you understand them and actually use them, you will prevent more incidents, more injuries, and more equipment damage than any checklist, poster, or policy ever could. We're starting with your right to refuse. Some situations are legitimately dangerous. Whether it's because something was overlooked, something wasn't communicated, or something is simply wrong, there are times when you cannot and should not move forward until the issue is addressed. Other situations feel unsafe for a different reason. You don't have enough information yet. Maybe you're unsure about the correct equipment, the right materials, or the proper procedures. You might simply need more information. As you move through your training, your education, and your career, you're going to hear this idea in a lot of different ways. But the bottom line is this: if you're not fully confident that what you're about to do is safe, then it is not safe. Confidence equals competence. And that means if you're not confident, it's not safe. You need to stop, take a step back, and talk to someone first. And if you still don't feel safe after that conversation, then exercising your right to refuse isn't just appropriate, it's the responsible thing to do. Next, we're going to talk about the power of a near-miss program. Before I explain what that actually is, let me give you 2 scenarios to think about. In the first one, a young worker catches something just in time before it becomes an incident. Their heart is racing, they're relieved nothing happened, and their first instinct is, wow, that was close. Thank goodness. Let's just move on. They don't report it because it feels embarrassing or because, well, nothing actually happened. Now in the next one, a team openly shares near misses during safety meetings. Not to blame anyone, not to shame anyone, but to identify blind spots so the next person doesn't get hurt. Every near miss becomes a lesson that strengthens the entire crew. These are the 2 realities that exist between a company that has a near miss program and one that doesn't. Which company would you want to work for? Which company would your family want you working for? Which company do you think has fewer injuries over time? Which company do you think people stay at longer? Which company do you think produces better technicians? And which company do you think actually learns from its mistakes? So back when I was an internal safety auditor for a while at a company I used to work for, I created a weekly contest. Whoever identified the most legitimate near misses in a week got a $25 Tim Hortons gift card. Now it sounds simple, almost silly, but it was highly effective, and the results were undeniable. Our actual incidents dropped dramatically. Is it because people love Tim Hortons? Well, not really. It's because people were finally taking an interest and talking about the things that almost went wrong, and they were fixing them before they did go wrong. Near-miss reporting translates to accidents happening less. And that's the power of a near-miss program. It's an intentional, structured process where workers are encouraged to identify hazards and close calls. Reporting is rewarded, not punished, and the goal is prevention, not blame. Information is shared so the whole team gets safer together. It's simple. Identify hazards or close calls before they turn into incidents, and then share that information with your team. That's really all there is to it, and it works. There's a lot more to learn about safety, and there's value in all of it. But we're not going to turn this into a full standalone safety module. That's not how safety works in real life, and it's not how it's going to work here either. Safety isn't something you learn once and then check off a list. It's something that comes up as the situation calls for it. Sometimes it's a quick reminder, sometimes it's a full stop. Sometimes it's a conversation with your journeyman or your team. Sometimes it's just a moment where you pause and ask yourself, is this actually safe? That's exactly how it works on the job, in the field, and in every shop you'll ever work in. So yes, there's a lot more to learn. There always will be. But if you remember the 2 foundations we talked about in this chapter, your right to refuse and the power of near-miss reporting, you'll already be ahead of most people first starting out. As we move through the rest of our lessons, we're going to integrate safety into everything we do, not as an add-on, not as a separate module, but as a cultural shift that shapes how we learn, how we work, and how we think. That brings us to the end of this lesson. All that's left now is to take a quick look at where we're heading next. Lesson 2 is called First Lessons in School and First Jobs in the Field. You're going to get the basics of thermodynamics and walk through the basic vapor compression refrigeration cycle. You're going to get a mini course in electrical fundamentals. We'll hit a few foundational formulas that you'll use for the rest of your career. And then we're heading into the field, so you can see some examples of some of the crazy things I've seen other people do. All right, that's where we'll wrap this lesson. Today was all about getting oriented, understanding the space you're stepping into, and giving you a sense of what this trade looks and feels like from the inside. Those first impressions matter, and they're part of how every technician begins. So take a moment before you move on. Think about what connected with you, consider what you're curious about, and that awareness is part of how everyone grows in this field. So when you're ready, I'll see you in the next lesson.